This is the Heather Petero Show, where conversation meets calling. Well, hey friends, welcome back to the Heather Petero Show. And yes, conversation does meet calling, and we're going to find out more about that today. Today's guest is author, entrepreneur, journalist, marketing executive, and a man who has spent a lot of time thinking about something the internet is absolutely terrible at: how to disagree without losing your mind and your peace. Jeramy Gordon is the author of Opinionated, Not Judgmental, and honestly, that title alone is enough to make some people not in agreement and others immediately open a comment section with their thumbs already warmed up. What I appreciate about Jeramy is that this message is not theoretical for him. This is not a man floating above the fray with neat little ideas and perfect posture. He has lived in the tension of strong convictions, public discourse, online heat, personal growth, professional rebuilding, and trying to figure out how to stand firmly for what he believes without letting that turn him into someone he doesn't want to be. And really, y'all, that's what makes this conversation worth having, because this is not just about being quote unquote nicer. It's deeper than that. It's about humility, restraint, timing, motive, delivery, self-awareness, and whether being right is actually accomplishing anything if the way we carry that rightness leaves a trail of damage behind. Woo! Come on now, Jeramy. So today we're talking about journalism, social media outrage, defending faith in a reactive culture, the difference between conviction and contempt, and how to examine yourself before you go correcting everybody else. Jeramy, I can tell we're going to throw down today. Come on. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Well, I've really been looking forward to this because I think you're speaking to something a whole lot of people are feeling and maybe don't quite know how to name yet, especially in the culture and social media the way it is now. So just start at the beginning for us, because people may be meeting you now through the book, but books usually show up after life has already kind of done a number on you. So take me back a bit. Who were you early on, and what first drew you towards journalism, ideas, public discourse, and wanting to work in the world of words and influence?
Yeah, well, I started my professional life in journalism. So when I was putting myself through college, I would write stories for the local newspaper. I eventually took a full-time job at that paper, working on the copy desk and really wearing every hat possible in the newspaper business while I was in college and then immediately after college. And then I got bit by the entrepreneurial bug, and I decided to start my own daily newspaper. And I did that in Santa Barbara. It was called the Santa Barbara Daily Sound. And I owned and operated that newspaper for about 7 years until the Great Recession kind of took hold and got the best of us, and that paper ended up folding. And then I moved into marketing, and I've been doing digital marketing really ever since I left journalism. But when I really got into online debate, and it was pre the first Trump administration, so 2014, 2015 time frame, and then really kind of exploded during the first Trump administration when it seemed like everyone was debating every little thing and we're all at each other's throats. And that's really where my online keyboard warrior era began to unfold, really.
Oh, wow. Well, we're living in a time when people are often very ready to react and not nearly as ready to investigate. And I do want to ask about this harder chapter too, because I think sometimes listeners only hear the polished version of someone's story. They hear author, entrepreneur, agency founder, thought leader, all the shiny words, but there's usually a chapter in there where the wheels came off a little bit. When the paper closed, what was that season really like for you?
It was probably the lowest season of my life, to be quite honest. I mean, I was just newly married. I had met my wife. We had, gone through our courtship and gotten engaged and gotten married. And I was on a high through all that, process. And then literally 3 or 4 months after we got married is when I made the gut-wrenching decision, and it really was a gut-wrenching decision to close down the newspaper because I had employees who depended on me for their paychecks and their livelihoods. I had dozens of contractors and vendors who, depended on us for their business. And it was just a really hard time. And it was one where I wrestled with my faith relationship a lot, right? Because I was young and inexperienced and relatively new to my Christian faith. And, I wanted to blame God for the failure of the business, a lot. And so I would spend time, like crying out, like, oh, if you just save the newspaper, God, I'll do anything. Those kinds of prayers,
The bartering.
yeah, the bartering and the desperation and, ultimately, God shut that door, but he opened so many new doors in my life that I've grown so much since those days.
Oh, yeah. Well, we think we know best, and sometimes we don't. God has a perfect plan for us, and it's our job to walk it out and listen and trust him, even through the hard stuff and through those transitions in life. Well, your book grows out of your own experience, and I appreciate that you're honest about that. You're not writing from a distance. You've admitted that there was a season where you were basically a fiery online keyboard warrior. I see it all the time, and it does nothing because you're never going to change someone else's mind being a keyboard warrior, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting part about this is my journalism background, because when I was in the newspaper business, I was used to sharing my opinion pretty forcefully, right? I mean, I was the editor of the paper, so I wrote the editorials, I managed the opinion page. I had full control over what went in the newspaper every day. And while I, obviously did my best to remain unbiased and impartial, everyone has their biases that kind of creep in over time. But when the paper closed down, I didn't have that anymore. I didn't really have the outlet to share my views and that sort of thing. So I turned to Facebook because that was the new bright shiny object, right? And everyone was on there, and I would get into these just the difference here. We have to take a step back, because if with the newspaper, it was just kind of me, with an editorial, it was just me opining, right? And yes, people could write letters to the editor, and I would publish those letters to the editor, but it was not real time. Switch over now to the social media age, and you post your opinion online, and all of a sudden, in real time, people are responding, and you're responding to them without even really thinking through those responses, and sometimes that degrades real quick.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people get trapped there. They start feeling like if they don't jump into every debate that somehow they failed morally, or they weren't a good person, or whatever it might be. And they take it too personally, and I think that's the thing online. You have to remember that words have weight. And it's like I sent a text to someone earlier today, and they said, wow, you just sounded like you were so overwhelmed, and I needed to call you. And then when I talked to them in person, they're like, oh, you sound fine. You sound great. It just shows you how the written word can be misconstrued.
Sure. And then there's also the issue of the audience too. So in the newspaper days, I was writing to, tens of thousands of people who would read or not read the paper. In my keyboard warrior days, these were my friends and family for the most part, right? These are people I knew and had some sort of relationship with, and would go back and forth and argue with. And so it was a really a vastly different experience. And I wrote the book really after realizing how much constant outrage and the online debate was affecting my mental health, right? My relationships, really my sense of peace. And like many people, I became caught in the cycle of always needing to defend my opinions. I had to win the argument. I had to prove that I was right. And over time, I began to recognize that conviction, without the humility that we're called to have, it easily could turn into that condemnation.
Well, and we have to think, our pride, our ego, there's timing, there's fear. motive. There has to be a difference between conviction and contempt. I mean, it is not our job to correct the world, right?
Correct.
So, but
Yep.
why do, especially as Christians and people of faith, why do we feel like we have to correct everybody?
Well, and that's the core message of the book, right? It's really that simple. You can hold strong beliefs without dehumanizing people with whom you disagree. And my hope is that after reading my book, that you would walk away more self-aware, more compassionate, and more willing to pursue truth with humility rather than hostility. And ultimately, the book is an invitation to step back from that outrage culture and rediscover the humanity behind our disagreements.
So you're saying basically that real love is just it's about tone adjustment, and I think that'll preach. I mean, but it also make people uncomfortable because they want to believe that they're right, that their version of the story is right, and that they have something to prove. So what does it really mean to speak truth in love, not as just a good, slogan, but as practice?
Yeah, I mean, we're called to love our neighbor, right? Jesus says to love God and to love our neighbor, and those are the two strongest commandments. And what that means is that you can show love for someone without affirming everything that they believe, right? And so I think that's where we kind of start to blur the line between truth and love. Right. So we say, oh, if in order to love someone, I have to agree with them all the time. I have to affirm who they are and what they say. And that's just not true. So that's where the truth aspect becomes super important to love. The two have to go together because love without truth is no good and truth without love is no good.
Right. And it's not just softening what you're saying either. I mean, that's kind of like halfway doing it in some ways. I mean, the Bible also says to be slow to speak. And sometimes you don't need to say anything,
Yeah, 100%. Most of maturing out of my keyboard warrior phase was learning just to shut up, right? Just to not have to respond, to be able to scroll past something I disagreed with, to be able to put down my phone, turn off the computer when I wanted to jump into a debate that I just maybe necessarily wasn't prepared for emotionally.
Right. Well, and what you're saying is the framework helps because it doesn't ask people to give up conviction. It's just asking them to examine how that conviction is being carried. So
Exactly.
So what does a person start losing when outrage becomes their operating system? I mean, we talked about peace, perspective, you mentioned relationships, but what about credibility? I mean, that sounds important too.
Yeah. So you start to, I mean, for me, I'll speak for myself personally here, but I became a different person when I was engaged in online debate specifically. And this is where I really draw a distinction because a lot of the times, we'll have a conversation with someone in person, face to face, and we can agree to disagree. That whole agree to disagree kind of mentality goes completely out the window when you're masked behind a computer screen and you have that, even though maybe you're talking to someone, you have that kind of semi-anonymous feel to it. And all of a sudden it's like you're fighting to the death, right? You're going back and forth on every argument and every point, and you do a point counterpoint until you're both are just exhausted. And what that was happening to me is it was killing me emotionally. Like I would turn off my computer and try to have family time, and I would just be so disconnected because my mind is still in that debate. Even though I've put the phone down and I've stepped away, I'm still replaying it in my head. And my wife would make comments like, she'd be like, you're not the same person when you're in those debates. And it was noticeable to her. And some of my kids who were young at the time, like they wanted their dad to play with them and interact with them. And here I am kind of in my own little world. And so it had a huge impact on my mental health and my physical health.
Well, I mean, and let's be real, you guys tend to get that alpha male kind of thing going on too. So
Yes.
let's talk about, I mean, you got to admit it, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
fighting to the death kind of thing. That's what I was kind of imagining. Well,
No, 100%.
so I do want to make this balanced because I know people listening come from different places. Some are deeply rooted in faith language, some are wary of religious jargon, and some are just plain tired. But I do want to ask this directly. Let's make it really plain. How do we hold deep convictions without becoming reactive, performative, or combative? I mean, this is the brass tacks right here.
Yep. Humility is the key. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but you really have to, it's a heart examination, right? So you have your convictions, you have your beliefs, whatever they might be rooted in, whether it's the Bible or your political beliefs or whatever, how you were raised, where you were raised, all these different things shape us, who we are and what we believe. So we have those beliefs, so we hold them. The question becomes, when and how and why do we feel the need to share them, and with whom and why? So, it used to be, back in, the day when I was a kid, like there were certain things that were just taboo that you didn't discuss, right? You didn't talk about politics at the dinner table. You didn't talk about money or religion or things like that, because it was just known that in a group setting, people had different views and you just didn't talk about them. Well, that's not the way the world is anymore. So it's like, so how do we get back to that, right? How do we get to a point where we can hold our strong convictions, we can maintain who we are and who we want to be, but we don't have to be so judgmental and in other people's faces with those views, but still hold them realistically enough to where we can continue to believe them.
Well, and the reality is Christians and churchgoers get a bad rap too, because there's a saying that says only the church shoot their own, and shoot the wounded,
Yeah.
And that's the reality of that. And a lot of people already think that Christians and religious people are already the most judgmental people on the face of the planet. And we got to do better. People have got to do better, whether you're a Christian or not, getting on social media and just fighting, and it's just creating anger. And you're right. I can feel that when I've got some friends that their whole world is wrapped up in the politics of this world and culture. And they just come across as just angry people. And I feel so sorry for them in some ways too, because it's like, there is so much more to this world that we could be doing than sitting there and wasting time on social media and fighting.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And, I guess the idea of like Christians being judgmental, and, we have all heard the phrase like holier than thou, right? And that usually comes up when, Christians specifically start talking about sin and what they consider sin and what the Bible calls sin and stuff like that. And all of a sudden it's, you're judgmental, you're this and that. And what I say to that is, I mean, first of all, Christians, we're called to, ignore, not ignore our own sin until before we can call out someone else's, right? We have to be able to recognize that we ourselves are sinners in need of a savior. And if we can't do that, then we're not able to call out other people's sin. That's kind of a basic, principle. But it's important to know that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And that means all of us. That means that's me, that's you, that's the listeners, that's your pastor, that's the atheist, that's the person sitting in the front row of church every Sunday. Every single person falls short of the glory of God. And so, the Bible doesn't teach that Christians are better people. It teaches that we're just sinners in need of a savior. And I think that's an important distinction to make for your listeners who maybe haven't read the Bible or aren't familiar with what Christianity teaches.
Well, I think we get put up on a pedestal because we say we serve that risen Savior. And so we must be like him, which we're supposed to be on that journey. But you're right. We all fail. We're still fallible. We're still human, and we still make mistakes. So let's talk
Yeah.
about this machine underneath all of this. You care deeply about social media, especially its addictive nature and the way it rewards division and emotional manipulation. What do you think these platforms are bringing out of people or maybe rewarding in people that is forming us badly, especially children?
Well, that's the thing. So, I mean, these social media algorithms are designed to encourage outrage, right? I think there was a study at Yale where researchers analyzed millions of tweets, and I'm talking about tens of millions of tweets from more than 10,000 Twitter users, and this is back before X and all stuff when it was still Twitter, but they found that these social media platforms, particularly Twitter, X now, reinforce outrage-based behavior through likes, retweets, and engagement. And what the study concluded was that people learn over time that expressing moral outrage online gets rewarded socially, right? It causes them to post more, it causes their content to become more outraged. And in other words, outrage almost becomes a conditioned behavior where it's like they're because the dopamine hits of the likes and comments and reshares are so strong that it rewards that behavior.
Hmm. Do you think that people actually know that social media is using them like that?
Well, I mean, yeah, and here's the thing. No, they don't. And one of the most interesting findings of that study that I mentioned was that the more politically moderate you are, the more influenced you are likely to be by these highly ideological users, right? So, like the research found that it kind of explains how ordinary people gradually become more extreme online. And I saw that in my own journey too, as when I thought I would have I would come to a debate with as a very middle of the road person, I'd quickly find myself being pushed further and further and further to one side because I believed a certain thing or argued a certain way. And I think the interesting thing too is that these social media platforms, they're not neutral mirrors of society. They're algorithms, and the systems are designed and to create incentives that shape our behavior and amplify like these emotional reactions that we receive by this outrage. That's literally how and why they're designed. And I think it's very scary, and it's most people don't know how easily they are being manipulated.
Sure. Well, I think, so many people keep sharing videos or they share a post and they don't investigate and they keep sharing bad information over and over and over again. Sometimes it's purely made up AI information or AI content. And people get worked up and it's not even real. That's the thing that
Yeah.
gets me crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with social media is most of it isn't real, and that's why I always even when I was deep in my keyboard warrior phase, I was always very conscious of that. I always knew to verify everything before I would jump into a comment section or reshare something. I always needed to confirm the authenticity of it myself because that's something I was always super conscious of, but a lot of people are not.
Well, let's talk directly about your book. It's called Opinionated, Not Judgmental. I love the title. I mean, it says that you can still have thoughts, so it's okay. So, what was the spark that made you say, oh man, this needs to be a book?
Well, I mean, I became a new person, really. I mean, that's the gist of it. I was a keyboard warrior. I had these online debates for the better part of a decade, and it was really after when Donald Trump's first term ended, and it really kind of seemed like the political tone in the country kind of dropped a little bit. People started kind of cooling down. And that's when I was able to kind of like take a step back and really focus on myself and who I was. So this is like, we're in 2021, 2022 now. And, I was not happy with the person I had become emotionally and physically. I was overweight. I was depressed. I was drinking heavily. all these things that I don't necessarily relate them all back to the keyboard warrior days, but it definitely played a significant role in that. And so something snapped in my head. I think it was my 40th birthday. I woke up and I was just like, I'm now 40. What am I going to do with my life? I have kids. I want to be here for their lives. I want to meet my grandkids. And so I started getting into shape. I stopped drinking alcohol. I've lost over 80 pounds since then. This was, 4 years ago now, but I really just had a full 180 of who I was. And that's when I started kind of thinking about this book and what made me want to change. And it was really my faith. It was 100% faith driven, right? I realized that the conversations I was having was not changing hearts. And that was what was most important to me. I wanted to change hearts, not minds.
That's amazing. So what did you most want readers to feel as they moved through it? Did you say, okay, this is a book for everybody? Or did you have friends that you said, oh, I'm writing this for them? Or were you writing it for yourself?
Yeah, I think I was mostly writing it for myself, right? As sort of a diary of my journey. But at the same time, it kind of then morphed into a guide for, I would say, it's written for Christians. I would say that, right? It's written for people with a moral worldview who can understand faith and why that's important in life. And so what I was really writing for was, my whole life, one of my biggest hesitations to becoming a Christian was that I always viewed Christians as judgmental people, as we talked about earlier, right? That they were, holier than thou, and that they thought they were, they just that was kind of my view of Christians. I think, obviously a lot of people shared that. But as I became a Christian myself, and I realized that that's not really who Christians are, the truth in the true sense, I wanted to share that with other people, and I wanted to share that with Christians too, who maybe hadn't quite become that aware yet, right? And so I wanted them to be more self-aware, more compassionate, and just more willing to pursue truth with humility than hostility.
Well, I think your journalism background is really helping you in this because that training teaches curiosity. And I think it's interesting that you realized you had a problem. Most people don't. They just keep doing it and doing it over and expecting different results. And that curiosity has led you in a lot of ways to the place that you are now.
Yeah, growing up, I was always a very curious person. I was always the little kid asking his parents, why does this do that? Why is that like that? And, I drove my parents crazy with all my questions. And what was most, I think, fascinating to me looking back now in hindsight was that obviously my curiosity led me into journalism and kickstarted my journalism career. But after I left journalism and I got into my online keyboard warrior era, that curiosity went out the window. All of a sudden, I was not interested in learning why people felt the way they felt or thought the way they thought. And I was more interested in explaining why I felt the way I felt and why I thought the way I thought. And that was a wake-up call for me, realizing that. And it took years for me to realize that. But I made that turn, and now, my curiosity has returned, and I'm more interested in understanding the why behind people than I am explaining my why.
Sure. So what has the feedback on the book been, or have you gotten a lot of outraged warriors writing you about it, saying stop?
The feedback has been immensely positive. If you look at our Amazon page, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of 5-star reviews of people saying, I needed this, thank you for explaining this so nicely and easily, and saying that they're going to buy the book for someone else too. They enjoyed it so much, now they're going to either give it or buy it for someone else. And so the feedback has been really incredible. I have not heard much negative feedback at all.
Sure. Well, has the book expanded into like a seminar or speaking engagements? Because it's definitely a message that needs to be heard.
So I started off, I actually have, I'm growing my social media following. I think, I have about close to 20,000 followers on across all the different various platforms. But I started off, 8 months ago with nothing, and have grown that to the 20,000 in just the last 8 months. But I started off promoting the book. I'd do reels and YouTube shorts and TikToks, promoting the book. And that has now morphed into more of not like miniature sermons, but I'm not teaching the Bible, but I am talking directly to Christians on how to live a life with more love and less judgment. And that's kind of what the book has morphed into for me, is this now online community that I'm building for Christians who want to live the truths of the Bible without being judgmental.
That's awesome. Well, let's change gears a little bit. You are not just a man standing in a spotlight yelling at the internet to calm down. So let's talk real life for a second. You love movies. What kind of stories as a journalist pulls you in every time?
Yeah, people are, any stories about people doing great things, people doing remarkable things. Like those are always the stories that I enjoyed writing, and I enjoy reading as a consumer of news as well. And then, politics are obviously a lot of fun too, with things going on. And for my world, it was always local politics, right? I never really cared much about national politics until I got into my keyboard warrior era. But in journalism, it was all very local. What's going on in our communities? What are people doing? That always inspired me and really got my creative juices flowing. So I love stories about people and their accomplishments. I think that's huge. On the movie side of things, I've been a movie buff my whole entire life. I originally thought I was going to go to film school before I spun off and went into journalism. But I loved watching movies, making movies. I think I wrote my first screenplay when I was like 13 or 14 years old. Like I've always been a writer and into that sort of thing. So that's kind of what drives me there.
Inquiring minds want to know, what's your most favorite movie of all time that you can watch just over and over and over again?
My favorite movie of all time is The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, wow.
That story checks like every single box of good storytelling throughout the whole entire movie.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, that movie used to play like on loop on like AMC and channels like that back before like streaming was a thing. And I remember, when you would channel surf and you would just flip through the channels, anytime I'd come across that movie, I would stop and just watch it, no matter where it was. It could be 10 minutes in or 10 minutes till the end or somewhere in the middle. And I would stop and watch that movie.
That's my husband's is It's a Wonderful Life. That's his favorite.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, can't mess that one up for sure. Well, you also said people might not expect how much you love cars. So what kind of car guy are you? Are you like performance, classics?
Yeah, I love all cars. So one of the things I did as a journalist as well was I wrote an automotive review column. So once a week I would review a new car. So that was all like new car stuff. But I've also, I inherited it from my dad, but I have just a classic car, a love and appreciation for the art that was classic cars back in the day. Like really, they were a thing of beauty, if you think of how they were designed and built and all that good stuff. I've owned some classic cars in my life, and it's just one of those things where it's like, you have to have a deep appreciation for it because they're a lot of work to maintain and to keep on the road, and especially if you want them as your daily driver. But I think it's just more of the beauty of it. I just appreciate all the thought and design that went into the automobile back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of lost today,
It is. Well, we go to car shows all the time. Our son, we brought him up going to car shows a lot. And so my husband has a huge appreciation for that as well. You guys would get along so well. But we actually knew a young lady who her dad bought her like a 57 truck, and she had to learn how to do the engine and the brakes and everything.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's quite the education right there. I love that.
I love it. That's awesome.
Well, you said if you got banned from your profession tomorrow, you would buy an RV and become a travel blogger, which honestly is not the worst backup plan I've ever heard. Where would you go first?
Yeah, so this is actually my retirement plan. My wife's about 6 years younger than me, and so I plan on stopping working long before she does. And I always said, I'm going to buy an RV and you can work in the back, and I'm going to drive us across the country, and we're going to go to all the national parks. We're going to try and visit all all the 48 continuous states. And that'll be our thing. We want to see America, and we'll see it from the road. That's my dream.
Well, Jeremy, we're at the portion of the show where we do quick fire. So no overthinking. You just commit to your answer. Okay.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Movie theater popcorn, gas station snacks, or pizza crust? What deserves more respect than it gets?
Movie theater popcorn. I can't get enough.
Oh my goodness. All right. One phrase people use online that instantly makes you tired.
To me, it's circle back.
Oh, yeah, that phrase, circle back. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone says they're going to circle back on something, and being in the corporate world, you hear it all the time. Let's circle back on that. I can't. My head explodes.
Right. So if you could permanently delete one behavior from comment sections, what goes first?
Oh, responding without thinking.
Okay.
People who just instantly jump into the comments and spew whatever nonsense comes out of their, at the top, out of their mind at the first moment.
Oh, sure. Best driving song for fake cinematic main character and energy.
It's an interesting question. Well, I'll say this: anytime we go on a road trip, we start our road trip off with "Fat Bottom Girls" by Queen, and so I'm going to say that's the best song for driving.
That's so awesome. What movie does everybody love that you are fully prepared to side eye?
Oh, I can't even remember the name of it now. Oh, it's called P.S. I'm Sorry. There was a movie called P.S. I'm Sorry that people just loved. It came out, I don't know, 15 years ago now, maybe even longer. And I just hated it. I hated everything about it. I thought it was poorly written. I thought it was too overly sappy. And people would get so mad at me when I said how much I hated that movie. But yeah, that's the one that comes to mind. P.S. I'm Sorry.
Well, maybe you should think about being a movie critic. I mean, you got this down. All right, here's the last one. You need a spokesperson for one day. Garth Brooks, a hard-nosed newsroom editor, or the Apostle Paul. Who gets the mic?
Oh, the Apostle Paul. He could speak for me all day long.
That's awesome. Well, I have to ask, Jeremy, you talk about your keyboard warrior era, and I guess we need to nickname it KWE. So if you could go back and talk to that Jeremy in real time, what would you tell him?
I would, there's a lot of things I would tell him, but I would tell him that none of this matters. I would tell him you're not changing minds. All you're doing is ruining these relationships, and to stop. I would say stop.
What if he said, I'm addicted? I can't. I mean, I've got to prove a point.
He was addicted. And I would slap him and say, you got to stop. You got to figure it out.
So you're going to resort to violence? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's myself, right? I mean, I can slap myself.
Well, for the person listening who knows they've been caught in that cycle, proving, correcting, reacting, posting, defending, what's the first step toward becoming more effective and less reactive?
The first step is to always take a step back and think through what you actually want to say. So if there's a post, if there's something on social media that you just feel called to respond to, don't do it in that moment. Save it, come back to it later once you've had time to think about what you want to say, how you want to say it. Because what I found was that was in the moment, must be said right then and there, debates that went off the rails almost instantly, right? Because you're not really thinking through your response. You have this visceral reaction, and you just feel compelled to the keyboard. Your hands just go straight there. I would say stop, breathe, and come back to that once you've had a second to think about it. I'm not saying don't respond. I'm not, if you need to, do it, but don't do it in the moment. Take a breath and come back.
Well, I think what you're talking about, though, it boils down to maturity. and self-control.
Yeah, 100%. It's and humility and understanding that, that it's not about you and your opinions any more than it is about them and their opinions. Like, you have to be able to have that maturity. Yes.
Well, Jeramy, tell us where we can find the book and connect with you.
Yeah, so you can check it out we have our website. It's opinionated-book.com. We're also on all the social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, now TikTok, the whole 9 yards. But it's available for purchase on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com.
Jeramy, this was such a great conversation with you. I think what you're calling people toward is not weakness, not compromise, not tone policing. It's maturity, the kind that tells the truth, checks the heart, and remembers that influence is not just about what you say, but how you carry it. Friends, the book is Opinionated, Not Judgmental by Jeramy Gordon. You can find it at opinionated-book.com and connect with him on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Jeramy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
And to our listeners, thanks for spending this time with us on the Heather Petero Show. Friends, we'll see you next time. Stay creative, live on purpose, and maybe log off before you type that paragraph nobody asked for. See you next time. You've been listening to the Heather Petero Show, produced by Heather Petero Studios. Connect with us on Facebook or Instagram, or visit heatherpetero.com. Until next time, stay creative and live on purpose.